My husband was hospitalized, so I left my 8-year-old daughter with my mother and sister. 2 days later, the police called. Your daughter was found unconscious behind a dumpster. I called my mother. She laughed. She probably wandered off. My sister said, I just told her to go outside. I hung up and called my lawyer. In a small white house in the lush suburbs of Willowbrook, Pennsylvania, the Watson family was living peacefully, at least on the surface. Mary Watson worked as a children's book editor at a local publishing house. Her husband David was an accountant, a reliable man with a good sense of balance. They had an 8-year-old daughter, Emma, a lively girl with dark hair and sparkling blue eyes who was the youngest member of the reading club at school. Emma, the school bus is here, Mary called from the kitchen. She smiled as she slipped a small note into Emma's lunchbox. It read, Have a wonderful day. I love you. From Mom. Emma came rushing down the stairs. Mom, the library is getting new books today. That's nice, dear. We'll stop by on our way home, Mary said, kissing the top of her daughter's head. She thought Emma's intellectual curiosity resembled her own. Mary treasured these happy everyday moments because her own childhood had been so very different. In the home where Mary grew up, there were no expressions of love or words of encouragement. Her mother, Judith, had been a cold and critical woman since Mary was small. You never do anything right, and you need to do better were everyday phrases. Sometimes, Mary would be denied food and locked in the basement. Meanwhile, Mary's sister Caroline was clearly her mother's favorite. Whatever Caroline did was creative or clever. If Mary did the same thing, she was scolded for doing it wrong or getting in the way. This unfair treatment created a deep divide between the sisters. Even now, Caroline lived in the same town as their mother and saw her several times a week. Even now, whatever mother said was absolute. After meeting David, getting married, and having Emma, Mary had kept her relationship with her family to a minimum. Just phone calls and visits for birthdays, Thanksgiving, and Christmas, the bare necessities. Still, whenever she heard her mother's critical words or saw Caroline's smug face, the trauma of her childhood would resurface. Are you all right? David entered the kitchen with a coffee in hand. He hadn't missed the cloud that passed over Mary's face. Yes, just thinking. Mary smiled. David knew about her past, and he knew what a strong woman she was. Do you know some people earn over $10,000 a month just by posting Reddit stories on YouTube? No face, no voice, just a laptop. I do it too, link below if you're curious. I might be late today. I have a meeting with a client, David said. All right. We'll stop by the library and then get dinner ready. That afternoon, Mary received a call at work. David had been in an accident at work and was taken to the hospital. He had fallen from scaffolding and hit his head hard. Mary rushed to the hospital. He has regained consciousness, but we need to keep him under observation for a few days, the doctor explained. I also recommend someone stay with him for the first few days. There's a possibility of unexpected complications after a head injury. Mary nodded. David woke up in the hospital bed and weakly smiled at her. Emma? He asked. She's at school. I'll go pick her up soon. Mary squeezed her husband's hand. The problem was, who would look after Emma? Mary needed to stay with David, and the after-school program Emma usually attended didn't offer full day care. All of Mary's friends worked and couldn't suddenly take a child for several days. There was no other option. With trembling hands, Mary picked up the phone and dialed Judith's number. Mother, I have a favor to ask. Mary explained the situation. Yes, of course I'll take Emma, Judith answered, surprisingly readily. Caroline will help too. She's on vacation now. Mary felt sick to her stomach, but she had no choice. Thank you. I'll bring Emma over in the morning. That evening, Mary explained the situation to Emma. Daddy isn't feeling well. I need to take care of him, so you'll be staying with Grandma and Aunt Caroline for a few days. Emma's eyes widened anxiously. But Grandma's house is scary. Mary's heart ached. Emma had instinctively sensed the atmosphere in Judith's home. You'll be fine. I'll come get you soon, and if anything happens, call me right away. The next morning, Mary drove Emma to Judith's house. The old 2-story house was the setting of Mary's nightmares. The door opened and Judith appeared. Her graying hair was perfectly styled, and she was elegantly dressed. From the outside she looked like a warm grandmother. Emma, I'm so glad you're coming to Grandma's. Judith smiled, but her eyes were cold and calculating. Mary hugged Emma tightly. I'll call you soon. If anything happens, contact me anytime. Back in the car, Mary gripped the steering wheel. Warning bells were ringing in her chest. But David needed her presence. Taking a deep breath, Mary drove to the hospital. Under the fluorescent lights of the hospital, Mary held David's hand while staring at her cell phone. 6 hours had passed since she'd left Emma. It was 3 when school ended. Mary dialed Judith's number. Hello, Mother. Has Emma come back from school? Yes, Caroline picked her up. She's having a snack now. Judith's voice had an unnaturally cheerful tone. Can I talk to Emma? After a brief pause, Emma's small voice came through. Mom? Honey, are you all right? How's Grandma's house? Yes, I'm fine. Emma's voice was smaller than usual, as if she was hiding something. There was a noise in the background and Judith quickly took the phone. She's really being a good girl, Mary. Don't worry. How is Dad doing? Mary frowned. Emma seemed like she wanted to say more. David is stable. We need to keep an eye on him a bit longer, but, well, that's good. Talk to you tomorrow. Judith ended the conversation. Mary tried to focus on taking care of David despite her worries. The next day followed the same pattern. When Mary called, her conversations with Emma were always brief, with Judith or Caroline quickly taking the phone. Emma's voice lacked energy, and Mary's concern grew. I don't think she's being honest, Mary confided to David on the third night. Her voice sounds different. Something must have happened. David sat up in bed and took Mary's hand. I think so too. But it looks like I can be discharged tomorrow, so let's go pick up Emma together. The next morning, the doctor approved David's discharge. If you experience headaches or nausea, come back immediately, and take it easy for the next few days. Mary breathed a sigh of relief. Now they could finally get Emma back. She helped David into the car and left the hospital. That's when she decided to call Emma. Hello, may I speak to Emma? Mary asked. Oh, Mary, it was Judith's voice. Emma is out shopping with Caroline right now. Mary frowned. But shouldn't she be in school? Oh, she wasn't feeling well today, so we let her stay home. Don't worry, it's just a slight cold. Mary's heart raced. Why didn't you call me? I knew you were busy. Judith's voice was smooth. Besides, it's really just a minor cold. She doesn't even have a fever. Dad has been discharged, so we're coming to pick up Emma now, Mary said. You should probably wait until tomorrow. Judith's voice suddenly became stern. David needs rest. Besides, Emma is enjoying herself here. You can leave her a little longer. Mary felt anger rising. No, we're coming today. We'll be there in 2 hours. After hanging up, Mary explained the situation to David. His face looked worried too. Let's go straight there, David said. Something doesn't seem right. They arrived at Judith's house at 2 in the afternoon. Surprisingly, the house was completely quiet. There was no response to the doorbell or knocking. Mary, let's look through the windows, David suggested. When Mary peered through the living room window, the room was perfectly tidy. But there was no sign of anyone. They must be out. She said they went shopping, Mary remembered. But she didn't say when they'd be back. They waited an hour. 2 hours. As the day began to fade, anxiety turned to fear. Mary called Judith's and Caroline's cell phones repeatedly, but both went straight to voicemail. We should contact the police, Mary said. At the local police station, they explained the situation to a young officer. He listened sympathetically but eventually shook his head. I'm sorry, but it hasn't been 48 hours since your daughter went missing. And if she's with her grandmother? But no one's at home, Mary cried. My mother and sister aren't answering their phones, and they said my daughter was sick. I understand how you feel, the officer said, but legally, we can't start a search right away, especially when the child is believed to be with family members. Mary and David headed to a hotel, disheartened. They decided to spend the night near Judith's house and check again tomorrow. I'm really worried, Mary said as she lay in bed. When I think about what my mother might be doing to Emma. David hugged his wife. Let's go to the house again in the morning. If no one is there, we'll contact a lawyer and formally file a missing person report. That night, Mary couldn't sleep at all. Terrible memories from her childhood came flooding back. The darkness of the basement, hunger, loneliness, and above all, the feeling of despair when no one heard her cries for help. Please don't do the same to Emma, Mary whispered in the darkness. At 5 in the morning, Mary woke up. Actually, she had never really slept. David was already up and making coffee. They prepared quickly without exchanging words. On the way to Judith's house, Mary's cell phone rang. It was an unknown number. Hello, this is Mary Watson. Mrs. Watson, this is Detective Johnson from the Willowbrook Police Department. The male voice was tense. I'm calling about your daughter, Emma Watson. Mary's blood ran cold. What happened to Emma? Your daughter was found collapsed behind the garbage disposal area on Cedar Street this morning. She was conscious but severely weakened. She's currently being transported to City Hospital. Mary screamed. David quickly pulled the car over to the shoulder and took the phone. While he was talking to the police, Mary dialed her mother's number with trembling hands. Mother, what happened to Emma? The police called me. Judith's voice was surprisingly calm. There was even a hint of amusement. Oh, really? She must have gone out on her own. She was in bed last night. Mary was speechless. Next, she called her sister Caroline. Caroline. Emma was found at a garbage dump. What happened? I just told her to go outside. Caroline's voice sounded cold. She was being noisy. That's all I know. Mary hung up and turned to David. His face was distorted with anger and fear. Let's hurry to the hospital, he said. Mary nodded, and in her heart she made a decision. This would end here. She would never let her mother and sister near them again, and she would make them take responsibility. Mary and David ran desperately down the white corridors of City Hospital. On their way to the pediatric intensive care unit they had been directed to, Mary's mind was filled with horrifying images. What condition was Emma found in? What had happened at the garbage disposal site? And most of all, why had her mother and Caroline responded so callously? Mr. and Mrs. Watson, a middle-aged female doctor in a white coat, approached. I'm Dr. Morris, your daughter's attending physician. Is Emma all right? Mary's voice trembled. First, her life is not in danger, the doctor said in a calm voice. However, she is quite weakened. She shows signs of dehydration, hypothermia, and has bruises all over her body. David squeezed Mary's shoulder tightly. His face had hardened with anger. How long do you think she was outside? David asked. Judging from her body temperature and state of dehydration, she was likely outside for at least one night. And Dr. Morris paused momentarily. There are other concerns. Emma's body also shows older scars. These indicate the possibility of abuse over multiple days, not just the recent few days. Mary gasped. The worst situation she had imagined had become reality. Can we see Emma? She asked. Of course. Just be aware that she's still in a very weak state. And the police are also waiting to take a statement, but considering your daughter's condition, they've agreed to keep it brief. Guided by Dr. Morris, Mary and David entered Emma's room. On the small bed, Emma looked so tiny and frail. An IV was connected to her arm, and monitors displayed her heartbeat regularly. Her face had blue-purple bruises, and her arms were wrapped in bandages. Mommy! Emma opened her eyes and called out in a faint voice. Mary rushed over and carefully took her daughter's hand. It's okay, you're safe now. Tears welled up in Emma's eyes. I'm sorry, I was a bad girl. No, Mary immediately denied it. You did nothing wrong. Can you tell me what happened? Emma was silent for a while. Then, little by little, she began to tell the terrible truth. The day I arrived at Grandma's house was okay. But the next day, when I was doing my homework, Aunt Caroline said I was too noisy. I had only dropped a pencil. David gently squeezed his daughter's other hand. Go on, it's okay. Then Grandma said, this is how we disciplined your mom when she was little and locked me in the basement. Emma's voice grew smaller. It was dark and cold. I was scared. Mary's heart ached. The fear she had experienced was now being inflicted on her daughter. They didn't give me food, just a little water. Emma continued. They told me to be quiet, but when I cried to be let out, Grandma got angry. Emma broke off and trembled. Mary wanted desperately to hug her daughter, but was afraid of aggravating her injuries. Last night, Aunt Caroline said, go outside, and opened the door. It was dark and cold outside, but I thought it was better than the basement then. I don't remember. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Mary and David were speechless. The doctor knocked softly and entered. I think that's enough, Dr. Morris said. Emma needs rest, and she pointed to a uniformed officer in the hallway. Detective Johnson would like to speak with you. Before standing up, Mary gently kissed Emma's forehead. I'll be right back. I won't leave you alone again. In the hallway, Detective Johnson was waiting with a notepad. He was a man in his mid-40s with experienced eyes. Mrs. Watson, I've heard from your daughter, he said. And I've received the hospital's report. This is clearly a case of child abuse. We're ready to request arrest warrants for your mother and sister. Mary nodded. Please punish them. I'll testify too. Detective Johnson looked at her intently. Have you experienced something similar? Mary took a deep breath. This was a secret she had never publicly shared. But now, for Emma's sake, and for her own healing, it was time to tell the truth. Yes. As a child, I suffered the same kind of abuse from my mother. Confinement in the basement, denial of food. I was always called the problem child. Meanwhile, my sister Caroline was mother's favorite. Detective Johnson nodded while taking notes. This will be important testimony. Your past experiences will corroborate this case. I've also contacted the Child Welfare Services, Dr. Morris added. Their representative will arrive shortly. An assessment of Emma's condition and environment is necessary. I failed to protect my daughter. Mary's voice choked. I should have protected her from my childhood trauma. Don't blame yourself. David took his wife's hand. We did our best. What's important now is keeping Emma safe and helping her recover. You're right. Mary raised her face. There was a new determination in her eyes. And I'll make sure my mother and Caroline take responsibility, so they never hurt anyone again. The first step is to apply for a protection order, Detective Johnson said. This will legally protect your daughter from any contact with the Hudsons. Next, we'll proceed with formal criminal charges. Mary nodded beside David. The fear and anger she had suppressed for years had now transformed into strength to protect her daughter. "Have you contacted a lawyer?" Detective Johnson asked. "Yes. On our way to the hospital," David answered. "She'll be here soon. Kate Branson, a lawyer specializing in child abuse cases." "Good choice," the detective nodded. "I'll return to arrange the arrests. If there's any new information, I'll contact you immediately." As the detective left, Mary leaned on David. Fatigue and tension suddenly overwhelmed her. "We need to protect our little family," Mary said with determination. "We will," David promised, "and your mother and Caroline will face legal consequences." Through the window of the room they could see Emma's small sleeping face. There were traces of tears on her cheeks, but now she was sleeping peacefully. The old-fashioned building of the Mercer County Courthouse in Pennsylvania exuded dignity with its imposing stone exterior. 3 months after the incident, Mary was climbing the courthouse steps, supported by David's arm. Emma was at school. They had deliberately arranged for Emma not to testify in court. They didn't want to deepen the wounds in her young heart. "Ready?" David squeezed Mary's hand. Mary took a deep breath. "Yes. This is what I've been waiting for." When they entered the courtroom, many people had already gathered. Local newspaper reporters had also come to cover this shocking child abuse case. At the prosecution table sat State Attorney Sarah Williams, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s who was highly regarded for prosecuting child abuse cases. And at the defense table, Judith and Caroline sat surrounded by lawyers. Both looked quite tired after 3 months in detention. But there was still arrogance in Judith's eyes. She gave Mary and David a cold look as they entered. "I'll rise," the clerk announced as Judge Martin entered. He was a man in his mid-60s with a stern expression. "The case of the state of Pennsylvania versus Judith Hudson and Caroline Hudson is now in session," the judge declared. "They are charged with child abuse, endangering a minor by placing them in a dangerous environment, and causing physical harm." The prosecution's opening statement began. Sarah Williams stood up and faced the jury. "Respected members of the jury, this case is not merely a family dispute. This is a deliberate and intentional abuse of an 8-year-old child. As the evidence will show, the defendants locked Emma Watson in a basement, denied her food, and ultimately forced her outside on a cold night. Her body clearly shows traces of abuse. And more tragically, this is part of a pattern of abuse that has continued across generations." Williams looked toward Mary. "As a witness, you will hear testimony from Mary Watson, the victim's mother, who experienced similar abuse during her own childhood. She has bravely stood up to break this cycle of abuse." The defense attorney, Richard Cohen, stood up. He was known for his high legal fees. "Members of the jury, this case is not as simple as the prosecution claims. My clients were merely disciplining the child. Do not confuse cultural differences and generational differences in disciplinary methods with abuse. Also, please remember that Mary Watson's testimony may be based on bias from years of family conflict." The courtroom was filled with tension. As the first witness, Dr. Morris, who had examined Emma, was called. She professionally explained the details of Emma's injuries, and why they were consistent with abuse. Photos were submitted as evidence, and the jurors frowned as they saw the bruises and scars on the small body. Next, child psychologist Jennifer Clark was called. Based on her interviews with Emma, she testified about the trauma the child had experienced. Emma shows typical symptoms of an abused child: fear, self-blame, and loss of trust. Particularly noteworthy is that she describes herself as a bad girl and believes she deserves punishment. This is a concept instilled by abusers. The defense cross-examination was fierce. Attorney Cohen attacked Clark's qualifications and methodology, trying to question the reliability of her testimony. However, Clark responded calmly, and did not waver in her professional judgment. Then came the turn of the most important witness. The prosecution called Mary Watson. Mary walked slowly to the witness stand and took the oath with her hand on the Bible. She avoided looking directly at Judith and Caroline. "Mrs. Watson, please tell us how you came to leave Emma with your mother and sister," Prosecutor Williams asked. Mary explained about her husband's accident and hospitalization, and that she had no other options. She testified about her anxiety when leaving Emma and her growing concern each day. "And please tell us about when you received the call from the police." With a trembling voice, Mary described in detail the phone call from the police and the subsequent situation at the hospital. The courtroom was silent. Then Prosecutor Williams asked the most difficult question. "Can you tell us about your own childhood?" Mary took a deep breath. This was a secret she had never shared in public. David nodded encouragingly from the front row. "When I was 5 years old," Mary began quietly. "My mother started locking me in the basement. For minor things, not putting away toys, being a little noisy. I was locked in the dark, cold basement all night, sometimes for days. I was often denied food." She continued. "My mother constantly told me, 'You are worthless, and you need to do better.' Meanwhile, my sister Caroline was praised for whatever she did. She was mother's favorite, and I was always the problem child. The courtroom was silent, and many people had tears in their eyes. Judith sat with a hardened face looking straight ahead, but surprisingly, Caroline covered her face with her hands and her shoulders were shaking. I swore not to inflict the same suffering on my daughter, but I failed to protect her from danger. Mary's voice choked. I love Emma, I'll do anything to protect her. The defense cross-examination was merciless. Attorney Cohen questioned the accuracy of Mary's memory, and claimed her testimony was emotional and exaggerated. However, Mary remained unshaken, and continued to state the facts calmly. As the final witness, a social worker from Child Welfare Services was called to testify about Emma's current condition and recovery progress. Emma is receiving specialized counseling and is gradually recovering. However, complete recovery from such trauma takes time. After the witness examinations ended, it was time for closing arguments. Prosecutor Williams passionately addressed the jury. This case is not just a single incident. This is a cycle of abuse across generations. Mary Watson has bravely rescued her daughter from that cycle. Now, we have a duty to show justice and hold the defendants accountable. Abuse is never discipline. It is a crime. Attorney Cohen also made his closing argument, but it seemed difficult to counter the weight of evidence. The jury retired to deliberate. Mary and David waited with tense expressions. 2 hours later, the jury returned. Has the jury reached a verdict? The judge asked. Yes, the jury foreman stood up. For the defendants Judith Hudson and Caroline Hudson, we find them guilty on all counts, unanimously. Mary buried her face in David's shoulder and cried quietly. These were not tears of sadness, but tears of relief, finally released from years of burden. The judge granted a week's grace for sentencing, but both defendants were denied bail and returned to detention. As the court adjourned, Caroline looked at Mary for a moment. There was an emotion in her eyes that Mary had never seen before. A year after the trial, the Watson family had begun a new life. Mary gazed out the window, watching Emma playing in the garden. Emma was smiling as she played tag with neighborhood girls. After the incident, she had stopped smiling for a while, but now she was gradually regaining her former brightness. She's really getting better. David stood beside Mary with a coffee in hand. Yes, the counselor Lisa said Emma has remarkable resilience. Mary smiled. The twice-weekly therapy seems to be working. They had decided to move to a new town for a fresh start. David had transferred to a local accounting firm, and Mary continued her editing work remotely while starting to work on child abuse prevention in her spare time. It was work that utilized her own experiences, such as speaking at local support groups and counseling victim families. Ready for today's lecture? David asked. Yes, I'm a bit nervous. Mary took a deep breath. But if my story can help someone, Mary's lectures had become well known in the area. Her talk, titled Breaking the Chain of Generational Wounds, was touching many people's hearts. Her honesty and strength were giving hope to those in similar situations. Emma had changed too. For the first few months, she was troubled by nightmares and feared unfamiliar adults. But supported by professional help and her parents' love, she was healing bit by bit. She had made friends at school and was enjoying reading books again. Meanwhile, Judith and Caroline were serving their sentences in separate prisons. The judge had sentenced Judith to 10 years and Caroline to 8 years of actual imprisonment, to break the chain of abuse across generations. A letter had arrived from Caroline 6 months ago. It contained brief words of apology, and mentioned that she was participating in a counseling program in prison. Mary had not yet written back. She felt that forgiveness and resuming a relationship were separate issues. There had been no contact from Judith. Mom, look! Emma called from the garden. She had a small butterfly resting on her palm. The butterfly rested its wings and eventually flew up into the sky. Mary smiled. It seemed like an image of herself. For a long time she had been trapped in the cocoon of abuse trauma, but finally she was free and taking flight. That night, after putting Emma to bed, Mary took out her diary. It was a record of their journey. She picked up her pen and began writing on a new page. I can now say with confidence that a true family is not about blood ties, but about protecting, respecting, and loving each other. When I look at Emma, I feel hope. She will not have the kind of childhood I experienced. The chain of abuse across generations has ended here. Outside the window, the full moon shone quietly, as if announcing the beginning of a new day, a new life.